Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. We'll give folks a couple minutes to join. We have quite a few people registered today, so we have people joining with mics automatically muted. You're welcome to drop comments into the chat, and also I believe you can still raise your hand if you want to add in, if you want to chime in. So great to see everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Really excited to be here with you all. Okay. Still popping in. We had over 700 folks register for this event, so I'm really excited to see everyone. Edward, I can see you. Yes, I see you in the chat and also on video. All right, I'll just keep admitting folks as they join. But I'm also happy to get things started for folks that are here. I know everyone's got busy days, and we really appreciate you carving some time out of yours to learn more about LISC small business lending. So with that, I can take us to our first slide and just give us a little bit of grounding for what we'll be talking about today. So welcome to Small Business Borrowing from LISC. We are going to be talking today about LISC small business lending process as a CDFI, our products and our thresholds, and then we'll kind of go through an example to learn kind of how we think about things as underwriters, and then what you all as small businesses can do to be best prepared to receive financing from LISC or from a similar CDFI. And at the end, we'll share some resources and next steps if you think you might be a good fit. So I'm going to take us to our next slide. Before we dive in, we wanted to do some quick introductions. And so we have a lot of folks on this call today. So if you could take a picture of that QR code, it'll take you to a website where you can answer some intro questions. And we also wanted to introduce ourselves. So I'm Alyssa Alfonso. I'm a program officer with LISC Small Business Lending. I help out with our trainings like this one today and also our CDFI capacity building programs. And I'm in Chicago today to be here in person with our team, but I'm typically based in Portland. And I'm going to pass it off to David.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hey, everyone. My name is David Johnson. I'm a business development officer. I'm based in Kansas City, but working with businesses all over the country and especially working on the front end. So as we start to learn more about your business, maybe work on collecting documentation, seeing if we're a good funding partner. I'm a direct contact usually at that stage. And then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Tamara.
Hi, I'm Tamara Underwood. I'm a small business loan underwriter with LISC. I'm based in the New York City metro area, but like David, I underwrite loans coming from all over the country. You typically don't meet me, so it's really fun to meet you today in this virtual way because I'm usually in the background crunching numbers.
Hello, yes, thank you all for joining. Thanks for everyone for mentioning that you couldn't see the screen. Hopefully now you can see the QR code. And if you hop over there, we can see where everyone in the chat is joining from today. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and move us over to our poll. All right, so should be able to join from here. So we're asking, where is your business based? Let me see if folks had any trouble accessing that code. I'm going to drop it into our chat as well, so folks can do that. So if you join at this chat, at the link that I just shared into the chat, you should be able to vote on our nifty little Menti poll. So I see folks coming from the Pacific Northwest. Love to see it. Thanks for being here from all over Arizona, Texas, Nebraska, Illinois, Michigan. That's way up there. Great to see. Okay, we'll give it maybe 30 more seconds. See if anyone else wants to chime in. I'll let some more folks in. Okay, I see some people dropping in the chat too. California, New York City, Maryland. Left the DMV. Okay. Awesome. It looks like we've got a lot of representation from Mid-Atlantic. Exciting. All right. And then I'm going to move us to our next question. So stay on your toes. What industry is your business in? So however you'd like to drop that in there, it's a word cloud. So as we see, we'll drop in answers. And also, we're in my glass office today. You can see a lot of people walking by. Okay, retail and manufacturing. This is great. Folks from all over.
Great diversity of business types.
Yeah, very cool.
Consulting, landscape design. And I think that they get bigger if there are more kind of folks in that industry, like the more answers that are the same. So
You have a lot of management consulting.
Yeah.
Design and retail. Great.
oh, it just keeps growing. This is great to see. Okay, looks like I might have hit a pause. So you can keep dropping those in there. I'll leave it open, but I'm going to bring us back to our slides. I really appreciate everyone sharing. It's great to, like Tamara said, get to see who's here today and really meet you a little bit more face to face, even though it's virtual. Great. Okay, so as I said, feel free to keep dropping into that poll, but I'm going to move us. So, and just drop in the chat if you can see that the slide has advanced. Is that something you can see? Okay. And so now that we've gotten to learn a little bit about everyone here that's joining, we wanted to just give a quick intro into LISC small business lending. And to do that, we wanted to share a video that we made from a deal that we're really quite proud of. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can hear the audio as well. And hasn't changed, but let's see. Oh, okay, I'm going to try again. See someone has a hand raised. Let me unmute you. Okay, you should be able to come off mute if whoever had their. Okay, I'm taking take two to share my screen. Hi there.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, so is this webinar for startups or businesses that's already been established?
Yeah, we'll dive into that in a moment, but we're as an organization, we focus predominantly on startups that have or businesses that have been in operation for 2 years or more.
Okay.
Yeah, but thanks for asking.
All right. Control space bar.
Hopefully. Okay, can folks see the screen and can they hear what's being shared?
A big goal. Always want to own my own barbershop. This feels different when it's yours. I'm Johnny It Gets Up on licensed barber educator, competition platform barber.
No,
Easy Cuts barbershop. But there I enjoy it. I had a very, very tough time as far as getting finance with anything. Just couldn't get along enough to start my business. So I basically saved and got a little something, and then I came in contact with it. Black Color Fund is a program that currently covers 10 cities in the United States. And the purpose of that particular program is to invest in entrepreneurs of color who have been left out in capital markets by banks, by other financial institutions, and try to level them. They help our business grow financially. They can get more employees to work in the business. Have traffic there, which is good for everybody because now the bar is getting more clientele and all going on.
ELCF creates an opportunity for entrepreneurs to have access to markets, customers, and materials. We want our funders and partners to be catalysts by investing in those entrepreneurs.
In 1 year, I did so good that I started to want to expand and just recently closed on my second property with this. Get another property. All the hard work and everything that I put into this business. Foundation.
Okay. I know that the audio quality wasn't the best. Thanks for bearing with us there. But that's Legacy Cats, a small business in Chicago that was able to get financing from LISC and really grow their business. So let's see. The next slide. And a little bit more about LISC Small Business Lending. We are a CDFI and we really work to support small businesses that have traditionally been locked out and had a hard time accessing capital. And we have, more expansive and more flexible guidelines to really be able to work with and support your business growth. Taking a kind of a big look at our portfolio. Right now, we have almost $25 million committed to small businesses on our balance sheet right now. Their average loan size is nearly $400,000 with terms, an average term of 71 months. And we have a variety of loan uses, and I'm going to pass it off to David to tell us about that.
Thanks, Alyssa. So yeah, as we dive into our small business lending process and products, we really at LISC try to have a needs-based approach to our different small business lending products. So what does that mean to you, the small business owner? Hopefully it means that we're working with you to understand what frustrations and challenges you're maybe facing, what opportunities you have upcoming, and seeing if leveraging debt and providing funding is something that we can do to try and be a resource to meet those challenges or meet those opportunities. So for things like working capital, that could mean for contracts, do you have any upfront expenses like inventory materials or staffing that you need to have funded? I see some heads nodding already in order to really mobilize and take on those opportunities. That can also mean for contracts, like are you on net 60 or net 90 terms? And you're having these gaps and challenges and struggles that some access to capital could help alleviate. For leasehold improvements, the next one you see there, again, getting into specifics, working with a restaurant recently to help fund expansion to their facility. So $100,000 worth of tenant improvements, equipment, working hands-on with both the small business and the contractor to make sure the use of funds was lined up to specific budgets and plans. Usually we focus on that $100,000 to $350,000 range in that kind of use, mainly because that's something that you're leasing. Hopefully the landlord's helping provide some funds to. The next one, commercial real estate, is really something we focus on as like a mission point too, to help you build assets as a small business owner. So this is something that you see in the $500,000 and above range in this slide for buying your own space. And again, maybe doing like a rent replacement strategy, where instead of that rent payment, we're turning that into a mortgage and helping fund the actual acquisition of a property. So those are just a general overview on some of the key products that we focus on. Again, really just based on whatever you have upcoming.
And then I see a question in the chat from Ruben asking, do you offer lines of credit or only term loans?
Ruben, that is a terrific question. So we really don't do much in the line of credit space, especially thinking of working capital. And that's where, because we're not a bank, that's kind of the end goal, hopefully, is we're lending as you're continuing to grow. Again, at least 2 years in operation. As you keep going past that and have access to those more traditional And maybe general lines of credit where you're just able to access it as you need it, pay it down, access it again. That's something that we're really encouraging. For us, the permanent working capital, those are usually term loans where funds are dispersed mainly upfront. Maybe there's some multiple disbursements, but then you're paying it back on a monthly basis versus that line of credit that you're accessing and paying down. And that's part of the reason too, where we really try and understand those upcoming contracts, upcoming needs that you have. And that way we're getting very specific with this. But that's a great question. And again, something that we encourage as you're able to access those types of products, maybe through other institutions. And please continue with the questions as I go, because I talk too much, so it's great to break it up. The next one here, the criteria, as we're starting to touch on, at least 2 years in operation. So some of our partners are, maybe back to the original question, focusing on startups like pre-revenue businesses, more microloan scenarios. We're kind of the next step in that lending ecosystem, at least 2 years in operation. So annual revenues of at least $100,000 is usually kind of the threshold we're working at there. And then the global debt service coverage, as we go along, we'll talk more about that, and Tamara will get into some specific examples of that. But we are still a cash flow based lender, even though hopefully we're flexible in a few different ways as our CDFIs like LISC. Ultimately, we are still cash flow based, so that 1.2x on a global basis is saying that after whatever you're paying yourself from the business, any other outside sources of income you have, all your own expenses and everything from the business, that there is still cash flow coverage to be able to add on this small business loan. We also look at a business specific debt service number too, to again understand the profitability and repayment just from the business. And then the other quick addition to that too is that's both historical and projections. So again, for these upcoming opportunities that you have, hopefully it's a combination of understanding what you've done historically and also what you have upcoming. And we're basing our repayment really based on both things. For equity injection, so the 10% there, that really especially ties back to commercial real estate. So like we talked about on the last one really quick, just as you're able to look at those opportunities to buy your own assets, commercial real estate through a more traditional bank or lender, that can sometimes be at least 20 or 30% equity injection, depending on the bank and process. So that's something that we're trying to solve for there. So an example of that, if you look to buy $1 million property, LISC would potentially be looking to contribute $900,000 towards the acquisition. You're providing the 10%. And then in addition to that, we're still, again, working with the cash flow to make sure that you can take on that type of debt as well. But that's kind of a threshold that we look at for equity. Credit is another one, again, from a flexibility standpoint. So we look at least 600 and above, maybe 650 and above is kind of minimum thresholds. We'll talk about that upcoming too. That can be a real tangible way that a CDFI can be more flexible than a more traditional bank that might, for regulation perspectives, have a very specific number, 720, 750 and above that you have to hit. Otherwise, it's kind of an auto decline situation potentially from the start. So we really try to work with you to understand on personal credit, have there been things like a bankruptcy in the past or any type of challenges and kind of what's happened since, what's the current picture. And again, these scores are just kind of a range of maybe what we usually look at as a minimum. Background checks, kind of the same thought there with just making sure we understand anything from the past. And a legal organization just must be a business entity, and principal owners must be in the US. So expectations. Really, the main thing is hopefully you kind of see here, we are a relationship-based lender, as are, again, most CDFIs and kind of lenders in this space. We're not an online lender, so somebody where you can kind of go online, fill out an application, maybe get funding within the same day. We're not that, but what we try and really provide through our process is technical assistance. Again, seeing where you're at in your trajectory. Are you working more with a micro lender? Are you ready to take on that $100,000 and above level of debt with LISC? I think some of the next one. So the first stage really, and this is my role a little bit, is just working with you on the front end to, again, understand where you're at, what upcoming opportunities you have, just kind of where you're at in the marketplace. Are you exploring an expansion, a new neighborhood, new location? Really just understanding all of those very personal types of things. The next stage for us, Tamara's being very modest too, even though she is crunching all the numbers. She is very focused on understanding all these human element related things as well. And all of us as a team, just understanding your financials. So it's not just collecting your tax returns and spitting out that global debt service number. It's really understanding what factors are going into those numbers. Obviously, there's COVID implications. If you're coming to us to seek funding, maybe it's because you're expanding or trying out some new product lines. So that's something that, because it's not an automated process and because it's not a more maybe traditional process, we really try to understand the color and context through our underwriting. That then leads into a credit review discussion and phase. So at that stage, we think we're the right fit. We think hopefully you're able to take on kind of this level of debt. And it's working through maybe even more specific questions on, again, understanding your competitors, understanding your flow of operations. And part of that can be hopefully helpful to you, the business owner, too. None of this hopefully feels, one, either too daunting, or it really is meant to come up with a good structure. Sometimes we can do things like interest-only periods, or understanding when new contracts are kicking in to make sure we have a proper structure as it goes into these credit phases. The next one then, closing. So if you're going through all that and get approved for a loan, we're working with you hands-on through a closing process. If it's commercial real estate, where there's acquisition of property, maybe construction and renovations, there can be some specific things where hopefully we can help work again with your contractor to make sure they're licensed, have all the documentation and permits and everything to be able to do the different phases of funding. So that's where we get hands-on in that stage. And then lastly, just after all that fun stuff going forward. So you've got the loan, you've got the funding, you're able to get your new site or equipment, whatever it is. Asset management isn't just kind of like collecting documentation again, post-loan. It's really working with you. Sometimes we have milestones built into the loan too. So after 6 months or after a year, hopefully you're kind of at this stage, and we're working with you hands-on to make sure that the everything is kind of going to plan, and that we're a good resource for you post-close as well. So again, in terms of kind of what you should be prepared for or kind of expected to share in terms of documentation. This will be on another slide as well, but tax returns. So we usually look at 3 years, both personally and for the business again, and that can be related entities, which obviously is common, right? So if you own some other businesses, making sure we capture all that as part of our global cash flow. Interim financial statements is something that we want to touch on and talk a lot about. So a P&L and balance sheet, something that we see a lot of is just the advantages of working with a bookkeeper or a CPA or somebody that you really trust and have as part of your team. So ideally, we're part of that team as a lender, a potential funder, kind of helping you come up with these strategies for both immediate and long-term funding. A bookkeeper and CPA can hopefully kind of do the same and make sure that you have those interim statements that you feel confident in. Things like QuickBooks can be initial really helpful tools for that too, but almost like another layer of that, of again, having a strategy and understanding kind of where you're at both year end and also throughout the year. So those are some of the things. Debt schedules to understand if there's any other debt, personal financial statements to understand, again, on the personal side, any other obligations or cash you have on hand coming into this. Something that's important for us there is making sure that we're not taking up all the cash with whatever contribution you have towards the loan. So making sure you're not over leveraged and have enough backup after whatever you put into the loan. So that's just an overview. We'll talk more about that as we go along too. And then one or two more things here. So personal credit, as we were starting to talk about. So all these different factors that can be on there. For bankruptcies, something like if it's an active bankruptcy, that's probably even for a lender like LISC. We likely wouldn't be able to add on or want to add on additional debt at that time. But let's say that's something that you had 5 years ago. You were just starting your company 5 years ago. You were in between some different jobs, whatever it was. We want to understand what has happened since. And again, maybe you've started your company since, it's starting to grow in all these different ways. A more traditional lender might have a very specific time frame of needing to wait 7 years or 10 years or something like that. That's how we can hopefully try and be more flexible in those cases, which really does kind of link up to charge-offs, judgments, student loans, things like that. Making sure things are active and in a good place and that the debt we're adding on is not burdensome is kind of our overall philosophy with that. There are some things like tax liens is maybe a good example. Usually we would want to see that you are then now on a payment plan for something like that too. So maybe it's, especially if it's related to the business, maybe that we're capturing that payment plan, making sure that fits into everything as well. So we know that there's a good plan in place. That can be how we would approach something like a tax lien from the past. And then other reasons for either potential decline, or a lot of what we talk about too are these plans. So it might be 6 months or 12 months might be the more appropriate time to take on kind of these levels of debt. And usually that is for one of these reasons. One, just if you haven't been in operation for at least a couple of years and maybe finding the more appropriate partner for that. If you are still working on things like tax liens and trying to get them into payment plans, those kind of factors to again see if it makes more sense to build out a little bit more of a long-term plan. I think, yeah, okay, great. Thank you,
Thank you
Alyssa.
so much, David, for walking us through it.
Thank you, and we'll pass it over to Tamara to give us an example and even more in depth on some of these things.
Yeah. So hi everyone, again, I'm Tamara Underwood. I'm a small business underwriter at LISC, and we wanted to give you a very practical loan example to share with you. You saw that long list of documentation, 3 years of business tax returns, 3 years of personal tax returns, personal financial statements, debt schedules. So what in the world do we do with all that information? And so our loan example is an opportunity to share what we as a lender do with that, hoping that we will demystify the process somewhat and make you feel able to even do your own back of the envelope analysis of your business financials as part of the process that you go through when you decide it's time to take on capital. I need to expand, or I need to do something. So our example is Bubbles Wash and Fold. This is a coin operated laundromat that also accepts people dropping off their laundry to have it done there, folded, and returned to them within 24 hours. Sally Smith founded this company in 2019, and since she was a startup, she wasn't able to get a bank loan. So she used her savings and was able to get a $25,000 microloan to purchase used washers and dryers, get them installed, and get her business off the ground. Fast forward to 2023, energy costs in particular are straining her business. Because the machines she has are not energy efficient, her utility costs are rising and are affecting her business's profitability. So she approached LISC for a $125,000 loan to get rid of her old dryers in particular and swap them out for new dryers and energy efficient dryers to really help her save money and get her business onto a solid path in terms of its expenses. So next slide. So the lender required 3 years of tax return, 3 years of personal, et cetera, et cetera. And the lender took all this information and then uses that to summarize the financials of the company to help the lender understand the request, understand the history of the business, and figure out if a $125,000 loan plus the microloan can be repaid based on the business's history. So the next slide shows what someone like me does with those tax returns. This example happens to be on Excel. I don't know if any of you use Excel or if you love it as much as I do, but you could do this on a sheet of paper. There's lots of programs online where you can take your tax returns and enter the information from your tax return. And what this allows the lender to do is look over time at how your business has trended. So the very top line across is the total revenue that Bubbles brought in its first year, and then in 2020, and so on. Underneath that are the expenses that the company incurred. Costs of goods sold, not all companies have costs of goods sold, but that's what you need to buy to make the product that you sell. So if you're a restaurant, it's the carrots, it's the onions, it's the meat, it's the pasta, right, that you buy. And the more customers you have, the more cost of goods sold you have. In this business's case, because they do drop off, that's the washing powder, the dryer sheets, everything that Sally buys for the business for when people drop their laundry for her team to wash, fold, and get back. And underneath that are more expenses. Those are what we often call the fixed expenses or the overhead expenses, like rent, for example. Whether she has 10 customers or 110 customers, her rent is the same every month. That doesn't change. So it's kind of a fixed cost to her. So if we look at the overall picture for 2019, we see she had $300,000 in revenue, $45,000 in cost of goods sold, $140,000 in overhead expenses. And when we subtract all of that from her total revenue, her net income in 2019 was $114,000. Okay, so now we want to ask you to put on your underwriter hat and do a little quiz with us. And the first question we're going to ask you is, looking at this pattern across the 4 years we have, what do you notice about Bubbles Wash and Fold revenue over the last 4 years? A little launch and an opportunity to put your thoughts down on that question.
Yeah, hopefully you can respond in the poll window. Okay, I see one response saying decrease during the pandemic.
It fluctuates, yep. Up and down, yep.
Okay. Consistent.
Yep. It's going up. But yeah, impacted by the pandemic and recovering. Great. I think we should all become underwriters. What do you say? So what about profitability? Is Bubbles Wash and Fold profitable? What do you see about the net income across the 4 years? Good return on 25K, yep. So yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Clearly the business was impacted by COVID. They had fewer customers, more people working from home in their pajamas, not needing to go to the laundromat. Also, if you look at the utilities line, you can see indeed that her utilities costs went up, and they are putting pressure on her profitability. So that even though in 2022 her gross revenue was greater than it was in 2019, when you look down at the bottom line, her other costs have gone up. And so she is not as profitable in 2022 as she was in 2019 on greater revenue. So for the underwriter, that helps tell the story for me, right? I'm like, she wants to get new dryers because her utility costs are squeezing her profits, and the numbers demonstrate the story. And that's really fantastic, right? It all lines up. So next, then the lender asks themselves the question, can this business afford not only to make its existing debt payments on that microloan, but to add now $125,000 of new debt? And in a case like this, the lender is going to emphasize looking back in time, because this business is not expanding. They're not getting a second location. They're not expanding into the next door property. They're swapping old dryers for new dryers. So in this particular case, we would emphasize more the historic performance, but we will talk about the future too, because let's imagine there's a new apartment building going in across the street that doesn't have a laundry room, right? That's a future opportunity for her to grow. So depending on the scenario, we may just focus primarily on the past or look forward, or both, as David said earlier. So let's go to the next slide. So the lender takes the net income, and then the lender calculates what's the annual principal and interest payment that the business has on its existing loan, and what's the annual principal and interest payment on the new loan. In this case, it's $125,000, it's 7% roughly, paid back over 3 years. So the total debt payment this business would have would be $55,000. Don't know if you can see that in the spreadsheet for 2019, right? So we're talking about debt service coverage. So what the lender, the underwriter does is they take the $55,000 of debt service and they divide it into the net income or the profitability of the business to see how many times over that net profit can cover that debt. And we can see in 2019 that ratio is 2.08, meaning there's enough cash to pay that debt service twice over with a bit left. She has $59,000 left over in 19 after paying all the debt, the existing debt and the proposed debt. So the question to you is, as underwriters, does the business have enough net income in all the historic periods to make those debt payments?
Polls open. Okay, I'm seeing 75% of folks are saying yes right now, 25% no. Now it's getting a little closer. 43%
Yeses.
split 50-50 now.
See, not in 20 or 21. Yep. You guys are great underwriters. We're all seeing the same thing. We're seeing yes in some years, not in all years, but it's definitely trending better, right? So all of you out there, based on what you've learned about this business, based on what you've seen happen historically, based on where it looks like it's going, would you approve the $125,000 loan that Bubbles Wash and Fold has requested? No. Okay, I see a no.
That's all we've got about a couple people saying yes, 50-50. Okay.
See some thumbs up. So very quickly, I don't know if anyone who says no would like to share what their concerns are on the history that we're looking at here with this business. Not without collateral, someone says. Highly sensitive to consumer swings. Okay, so that's a reason for being cautious about this business. We saw what happened in 2020. It's very dependent on a robust economy, people going out to work and needing nice, clean clothes on a regular basis. So yeah, there's a vulnerability here. But the business has also kind of rebounded nicely. So I think this is a way of saying that it's kind of gray sometimes, right? And so understanding maybe the environment around the business and what's happening in the local economy can either give you more or less confidence in the strength of the application. We can go to the next slide. So global cash flow combines both personal cash flow and business cash flow together and looks at personal debt and business debt together to understand globally, can this business owner manage all of the obligations that they have personally and in the business? Because we know many small businesses, what's in the left pocket goes to the right pocket, around to the back pocket, and the money kind of flows in a bit of a circular fashion. And so that's why we want to look at it globally. So if we go to the next slide, we see what we collect on your personal financial statement and in your personal tax returns is used to help us do your personal cash flow, very much like we do for the business cash flow. So we learned that Sally has a mortgage payment of $895 a month. That's in the top table. We learned she has an installment loan that she pays $250 on a month. So every month she pays $1,000 for her own personal debt. Annually, that adds up to $13,740, right? Then we look at her personal tax returns and we spread that information like we do on the business tax returns. She gets $35,000 in wage income from her business. She earns some interest. And then she has outgoings like taxes, living expenses, right? Her personal cash flow after she pays those expenses that's available to cover her debt in 2019 is $20,900, right? That's what she has to cover her $13,000 in debt. So her personal debt service coverage is the $13,000 divided into the $20,000 of cash available after other expenses. And we see in this case for 2019, she can cover that $13,000 one time over, or really 1.5 times. So that's pretty good. She can cover her personal debt and still have some money left over for unexpecteds, right?
Do you want to ask the question or?
Let's keep it moving. And this is a table that combines everything together. And this is how we get to our global cash flow and our global debt service coverage. If we look at 19 again, we see how we've taken the net income from Bubbles Wash and Fold. We've added in Sally Smith's personal cash flow of 20,000, so that the total available cash to cover business and personal debt is $135,000. We've added together all of those annual debt payments personally and on the business, which is $68,000. We divide the $68,000 into the 135 to get 1.97 is the global debt coverage. And as we said earlier, our cutoff is 1.2 times globally debt service coverage. And in 2019, we can see that this business and this person's debt service globally coverage was 1.97. So the question to you is, does this picture meet our requirement of 1.2 times in all of the years we're looking at? So 19, 20, 21, and 22. Are we at 1.2 or better in our global debt service coverage? We're not, right? I see a head shake. No.
Everyone's saying no. So
Yeah, right. So you got it. So we're not seeing it. And that fits the pattern that we've seen on her business, right? Her business took a hit during the pandemic. She had a bad year. 2021 doesn't quite meet our metrics, but it's going again in the right direction. And by 2022, it's very, very solid. So again, I don't get to make loan decisions, but if I did, I would take my wand and I would say, ding, I think I might approve this loan. Let's go on to the next. So there's something else we talk about a lot and we put on our list, which is the business balance sheet, but we don't analyze it very much. And it's kind of complicated. And I'll be honest, it's not my favorite topic, but it is an important concept. Every business has a balance sheet. It's essentially like your personal financial statement. It's a quick summary. It's like a photograph of everything your business owns and everything it owes other people and everything you've invested in your business and how much you've retained in your profits in your business at a particular point in time. So the point in time here for Bubbles Wash and Fold is the end of 2022. And what this tells us is that Sally owned cash and inventory worth $82,000 at the end of that year. Her machinery and equipment was worth $175,000 at the end of the year. And the furniture and things like her point of sale system she has in Bubbles Wash and Fold was worth a total of $200,000. So everything the business owns is worth $282,000. Okay, and that has to be balanced against what it owes to other people, like its microloan in this case, and it's balanced by also what other assets remain in the business that she's kept in there or invested in there at the very beginning. I like to think of the balance sheet as like the motor room of the business. It tells you how much gasoline it has or how much charge there is in its EV battery to run tomorrow, right? So that's just a very simple way to talk about the balance sheet. And we look at it because it helps us understand how much debt the business has in relation to those assets that it can use, its cash, its machinery day to day to generate revenue, to pay its obligations. And that's it. So thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully this was not too much information, not too little information, just enough to help you understand what we're doing with the financial information you present to us when you apply for a loan.
Thank you, Tamara. So to kind of close a little bit, we'll just recap some of the things in terms of preparation going into conversations, and would love obviously to follow up with all of you after today to really start or continue the conversation. So in preparation for a loan, some of the things that we've touched on, I think the first one, sorry, let's see it, just the use of funds. So kind of going back to, again, in the line of credit question, we really want to understand, ideally from the start, some of the ideas that you have, challenges you're facing, and certainly once we get into our committee stages, having a very specific plan for use of funds. So as you see here, switching from bubbles to ice cream, maybe looking at some very specific freezers and what vendor even that you would be working for those. And also, like Tamara mentioned, maybe understanding the benefits of going from old machines to new machines and how that's going to be cost savings and beneficial to you. Maybe there's a debt consolidation piece. Usually that's not the majority or predominant use of funds for us, but maybe it's a secondary piece to help free up some of that additional cash flow space as well. Marketing consulting, like we talked a little bit about with that, or staffing, maybe it's not a full annual salary for a position, but maybe it is 3 or 4 months and ramp up period for adding on a new key staff member, especially if it's kind of related to some specific upcoming opportunities that you have. So those are some of the things to kind of maybe have in mind as you approach us or any lender and debt piece, just for how you would use funds from the start. The document request list, like Tamara really did an awesome job of mentioning why we're looking at some of these things. So this is a complete list, which of course we'll share and talk about going forward, so you don't feel like hopefully this is a daunting process, and we can work with you throughout the process to understand the different components of these documents. Maybe one thing to touch on, which we started to talk a little bit about, but like things like that commercial real estate acquisition at the bottom. If you're acquiring the property, and in a lot of cases, there's going to be some work that needs to be done to it too, right? So it's not only working on the acquisition, but starting to work with that team you're going to have in place, like an architect or contractor. If you're buying a building, you'll see the building needs assessment in the very bottom right. We want to make sure we're supporting you in that you're walking into a good situation, that if you're going to be taking on that size of opportunity, that you're walking into and doing the research on making sure it's where you want to be, that it's the specific building that you want, and that you're not walking into any issues with it. So again, kind of the context for why we're hopefully working with you on these things. Be ready for questions. It's another thing. Hopefully today we've presented ourselves as people you want to talk to going forward after today too. We want to work with you on these things. We want to understand the flow of your operations, the different opportunities you have coming up. That is not meant to be any type of accusatory type of thing. And we're talking about credit and all these very personal things. It's because we want to understand the backstory audit for personal, for business, everything you have upcoming, and not having it be this like black and white decision that's just based off some of these factors that really has full context to it. So we do want you to be ready for that process. So you don't feel like it is hopefully like an attack type of thing when we ask questions. And then lastly, and maybe going into that, just transparency is really important, and knowing that can be very challenging. We don't want to diminish that having that transparency, having that openness to be able to talk about some of these things is not an easy thing to do. So we really appreciate you joining today, having conversations going forward, maybe considering lending in the future, because it is a very relationship-driven process. So we hope for transparency in that, not only from you, but also from ourselves, so that you can ask us questions, understand the different things we're looking at, and different feedback we have.
Wonderful.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's it.
thank you so much to Tamara and David for sharing all of that wonderful information. I learned something every time you guys do this. And so one thing we wanted to share before we move on to hopefully answer the great questions that have been dropped in the chat so far, we wanted to share with you some next steps and some resources. So I've seen some folks sharing, are there any templates available? Steve mentioned, we can't share everything, but we have a funding sources and uses worksheet here that can help kind of direct that ask, make sure it's as specific as possible, as David mentioned. And then we also have some more information to learn more about our small business lending resources if there's any questions after today. And then next, we also have a small business questionnaire if you are interested in kind of continuing the conversation. If you think based on our thresholds, have been in operation at least 2 years, have over $100,000 in annual revenues, that you might be ready to take kind of continue this conversation around a loan from LISC. So you can take a picture of that QR code, or and you should be able to, that'll take you to this kind of questionnaire so we can learn a bit more about you and continue that conversation. You should, and then I'll share this presentation after the call as well, so you can access these links. And so I think I've been seeing some great questions in the chat throughout this conversation, but just since we have a few extra minutes, about 10 minutes, to drop any questions in the chat that might be beneficial for the whole group. And I also see Steve Hall on our team who leads all of this wonderful work. Steve, did you want to add anything before I pass it over questions?
No, I do. I want to just thank everybody for their attendance today. I answered a number of the questions within the link. We're going to continue to have series like today's call. We're going to invite in some of our other partners. So a lot of you asked about potential loan opportunities that we don't do. But we work with 25 different CDFI partners from Oakland to Miami who could also be great partners in your business wherever you are in the business life cycle. So we're just excited that you were able to attend today. Some tools we will not share with you, because they're underwriting tools, and we realize we do have some underwriters on the call. So shout out to my man, Jose, great responses. I'm gonna send you a check. I didn't know you were going to be on the call, but we're glad to have you. So but it's important for all the businesses out there, make sure you identify a partner who's going to help you with your business. We're a community development financial institution, and it's really, really important that you seek out a not-for-profit mission-based lender who is a community development financial institution. So that designation means that they've been established to protect you, not take advantage of you, not offer you predatory rates, and advise you improperly about your business. So our goal is to help you matriculate back to a major financial institution so you can get credit at any time that you need. But we really appreciate having you on today's call. And I think we got time for maybe one question. So Alyssa, take it from there.
Okay, I know someone's had their hand up for quite a long time, so maybe since you've been so patient, Janitha, let me allow, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question, please feel free. And let's see. Still, if you have a question, feel free to ask. Okay, and then.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So my question is, suppose you make the whole checklist except for the fact that you don't have a 600 score.
I'll start there if you'd like, Janitha. Thank you for the question. I think personal credit is a pretty main factor of why a CDFI might be a better fit than a more traditional bank. And again, that isn't meant as a slight to those more traditional options. They just might be regulated in very specific ways with a score and not able to really hopefully dive deep into the context. So genuinely can think of some examples, and it is a technical exception to our policy if it's below 600, but can think of some examples where we've lent to small businesses with a credit score that's lower than 600. In those cases, again, it's understanding like what factors led to that with the score, understanding what the current picture is, just to make sure, first and foremost, that now is a good time to add on kind of this level of debt too. And that can be the other thing, just to be transparent, is sometimes that does mean maybe starting with more of a micro loan if you kind of, after analyzing everything, kind of think that that payment that's tied to it does fit more in line with a slightly smaller loan size. But again, I can't think of a couple of examples for these $100,000 and above loans where we have lent in those cases if the current situation was good. And again, things like tax liens maybe we're starting to be on payment plans and kind of factored into. So does that kind of fully answer your question, or are there some follow-ups to that?
Somewhat. I am a survivor of COVID. And so with that being said, a lot of times when you're hospitalized and you're fighting for your health, things tend to go awry. So I didn't know if that was one of the you know, factors that would be filtered into that or not. But you know, when you're sick, you're not thinking too much highly about your financial part. You're thinking about your physical part. So it was just a question.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, first of all, and thank you. I'm so glad you're doing well, it sounds like. And medical payments are a specific one that we really do not look at in the same way as like a credit card charge off or a tax lien or something like that, even though obviously sometimes there's the trickle effect. And
yeah, but that's what can lead up to the
charge
and all of that. So I don't know if that's a good question or a bad question, but
it's a great question. No, and genuinely with that, and maybe there is something, and in other cases too, where it is like a specific medical collection because of that or something else. And again, that is just off the bat kind of looked at in a different way. But if it did trickle into these other factors and cause slow pays and other things like you're mentioning, again, that is absolutely where we would want to review the report, review it with you, and understand those things. And that off the bat, especially if now you're back in a place where you think you're kind of able to get back to paying things, that's the context that we're talking about, for sure.
For sure.
And I would just say that's the beauty of working with a community development financial institution, because they don't just look at the score and turn the page. As long as you are able to discuss what happened, we want to hear, because we want to understand the context, because we know life happens, unexpected things happen. And, you know, a score does not tell the story, right? So we want to understand, and then we can usually move past it in those situations. So.
Thank you.
Great question. No, thank you for sharing.
Great. And I know we have 2 minutes left only, so I'm not sure we have time for everyone's questions, but Jose, if you have a question, I see your hand was up next. So go ahead. Oh, I have to be able to take it off. There you go.
Hi. Okay, great. Yeah. So the question I had was, do you guys, in addition, so you're looking at debt instruments, and you mentioned that you had other partners, right? So do you also do debt and equity pieces, right? In other words, sometimes the solution for business is a combination product, some debt and some equity, right? And so do you have the opportunity to be able to partner people with angels, for angels that also have a social consciousness?
It's a tremendous question, and it's going to be a great follow-up on, hopefully, if you'd like after, just because the quick thing I would say, even within LISC, we have a strategic investments arm that has some really exciting new products that are being developed that are kind of along the lines maybe of what you're mentioning. There's a partnership with Uber Eats for a Black restaurant fund that is a little more like revenue and almost equity focused in it. So within LISC, actually, there are some new. And then, like Steve mentioned, with our different partner organizations and CDFIs, some of that then also becomes market specific based off wherever you're based. But a lot of our partners are developing products in that space. And then, like you mentioned too, maybe that is an outside investment arm. The quick thought I would have there, Tamara might have a better response to this too, is just that gets factored in at some level too, right? So even if it's not traditional debt, just making sure, does it have a repayment component, making sure we understand that as long as it all fits. I don't think off the bat, in a lot of cases, it can be a few different funding sources and types for sure.
I mean, sometimes it's, you take on an equity partner a la Shark Tank for a preferred, either you do a preferred return or something like that, or
sure.
And, you know, sometimes depending on just the deal that you're in, sometimes debt, I mean, before it was stupid to use equity because debt was real cheap, right? And at the 2% or 3% interest rates, it was almost like using cash, right? But now, with debt climbing to 7 to 8%, that's beginning to look a lot like equity territory, right? You know, cap rates, internal rates of return typically were around 8 or 9%, right? So my sense of it is that now it's a little interchangeable, and sometimes you need the money to stick around in your business a little while. Like, for instance, the nice thing about the EIDL loans from SBA was that they stuck around in your business for 2 years, right? Before you had to begin repayment. The bad thing, not the bad thing with debt, but the piece about a debt instrument is repayment begins right away, right? So not all the money's coming out of your business, but you know, you have to plan for it, right? And sometimes it needs to gestate for a while. It needs to gestate, right? Especially if you're, in my case, I'm a management consulting firm. I take on projects. I don't commit to employees because our revenue streams are such that they're very project-based. So we have loose, tight networks of consultants where if we have larger engagements, we bring them on. If we have smaller engagements, we do less of it, right? But if we were to bid on, say, a couple of $1 million worth of business, right? It's quite conceivable. Most corporations will make you wait 90 days to get your money. So you just start doing the math on that one, right? And you could be out $500,000, right? Most banks will look at that and say, that's still a little too risky because, you know, unless you've got a termination for convenience clause that's 90 days or above, they're going to be like, well, you know, but where a bank or a fund like LISC may not be willing to tread, an equity investor might, or an equity investor might say, you know what, LISC, if you put up half, I'll put up half. You put up 250, I'll put up 250, right? And we'll take a collateral assignment on this guy's contract, which means if he doesn't perform, we'll put someone else in, right? And then you get the deal done, right? So it's those kinds of things that I think, because of the fact that we are in the economy we're in now, we're no longer in this easy money thing. You have to look at things like that.
Yeah, thank
Agreed.
you for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I know we're a little over time, so I'm gonna have to
Sorry
wrap us up now. No, but we really appreciate everyone's engagement and sharing the time today. Like I said, I will circulate these resources and the recording from this call to everyone that's registered.